Hey guys, Spence here at Core 4x4. Today we have a JL in the shop, a stock one, that we're putting a small lift kit on, and I wanted to take a moment in this video to really explain when and why you need adjustable control arms for a lift. Because far too often, most lift kits, especially from the dealer, won't include control arms, which is one of the most important parts of any lift kit and can drastically affect how your Jeep rides and drives. So we're gonna get into that, but for now, let's get the Jeep in the air and start putting the kit on, and then we'll talk about the arms. So before we got into teardown and install on this, I wanted to talk briefly about some of the things I see from a lot of the cheap lift kits or a lot of the dealer lifts, which I would really highly avoid. I know it's enticing when you're buying a Jeep and they offer you a lift kit, but keep in mind they are there to sell a vehicle. So at bare minimum, usually dealers are just gonna throw on new springs, maybe new shocks, and they won't even address the arms at all. Now, this is a small lift kit we're putting on, it's 2 inches. This customer is strictly daily driving with a little bit of light trail use. So we are doing the Cruise Series arms. Now, the main thing you need to address when you're doing a small lift like we are today and you're reusing your factory control arms is the rubber bushing that comes in your factory arms. Now, a standard rubber bushing has a fused crush sleeve. Now, what that means is that your rubber is literally fused to your crush sleeve. As your arm moves up and down and cycles, it does pull on the rubber a little bit, but these are torqued down at your ride height, so that is your neutral position, which is exactly what you want to do for rubber. But as you lift the vehicle, your arm twists and droop, and if you don't unclamp your bolt and reclamp it to reset the neutral position on your rubber, this causes an unnecessary preload on the bushing, which will cause them to fail prematurely. And a lot of the cheap kits that I see put on by dealers or at home don't really address this issue. So in order to address that issue, what we're gonna do is not only are we taking the lower control arms off because we're replacing them, but we're also gonna loosen all the bolts on all the upper control arms. And that'll not only help us to get the new control arms in and pivot the axle, but that's gonna allow us to reset our neutral position on our rubber bushing. Now, if you do go with an aftermarket arm or a polyurethane bushing like we have in our control arms, these have an independent crush sleeve. And so these can be torqued in the air. These can move a bit more freely and allow your suspension to cycle more freely. And you don't have to be so concerned about the neutral position of the crush sleeve like you would on the rubber. But for now, let's just jump into teardown and start getting the front end done. And then we'll get over to the table, we'll set the control arm length, and we'll talk a little more about caster. All right. It's freaking hot in here. There we go. All right, so now that we got the front end torn apart and mostly put back together, all that we have left is the lower front control arms. And before we put these in, I wanted to take a second and talk about caster and how that affects your drivability and why you actually need adjustable control arms when doing even just a small lift like we're doing today. Now, what I'm gonna be talking about does apply to all of the Jeeps and any solid axle front end really. When you lift your Jeep or truck and you still keep your factory control arms, what that does is as you lift, your axle actually gets pulled down and back. So not only do you lose your wheelbase, you actually lose a little bit of that caster. Now, like I said, this does apply to all of the Jeeps, but more specifically to the Wrangler JL and JT. These two models are the most susceptible to this caster issue because from the factory, they come with about 4 to 5 degrees of caster. And in my opinion, these don't drive right until they have at least 6 or 7 degrees of caster. Caster is what allows your Jeep to recenter after making a turn, which means it drives in the direction that you point it. So when you lose your caster, you lose that drivability. You'll notice you'll get a little more flighty, or your Jeep will want to follow the ruts in the road, and you shouldn't have to wrangle your Wrangler to keep it driving straight. So adding back caster with adjustable control arms allows you to get that drivability back. And not only that, at the same time, you could also gain some flexibility over your factory arms. Another question we get asked all the time is, do I have to get the whole set of control arms, or can I start with just a pair? The answer is no. You don't need to get the full set of control arms unless you're above 4.5 inches. Then I would highly recommend it. But anything below 4.5 inches, honestly, you really just need the lower fronts and possibly even the upper rears on these Jeeps to get them driving right. So for today, we're gonna get this Jeep as close as we can to that 6 to 7 degree range of caster that we talked about. And on a 2 to 2.5 inch lift, what that means is about 24.25 inches eye to eye on the lower control arms. And that's gonna get us pretty close. We'll get these set, we'll get them bolted on, and we will do an alignment after the full lift is done, but this will be close enough to get us driving and get us to the alignment shop. Now, if you watched our greasing video, always add some grease on install to the outside of your bushings here where they contact the brackets. So if you have the Camp or the Crawl series, you don't need to pre-grease those. Those come greased already. But anytime you have a polyurethane bushing, definitely pre-grease before install. All right, so now we're onto the rear end. The only adjustments we need to make are for the upper rear control arms. And really these are optional at 2 inches of lift, but we are gonna use them to dial in our pinion angle to make sure we don't have any rear driveline vibrations. So we're gonna set our upper rear control arms at 17 5/8 of an inch eye to eye, which is almost a 1/4 inch over our factory length. This should get our pinion back to where it needs to be to make sure we have no rear end issues. Again, this is an optional adjustment in the rear end. This isn't 100% necessary at 2 inches of lift, but this is gonna give us the most optimal driveline angle for the rear end at this lift height. So all we have left is to set the arms to length, bolt them in, put the coils in, and we're pretty much done for the rear end. More. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this lift that we put on this JL we have in our studio. And it gave us a chance to talk about when and why you need adjustable control arms. And just to recap a little bit, a few things we talked about. Always tighten your rubber on the ground at your ride height to get your crush sleeve seated at a neutral position so you're not losing your factory rubber bushings after a few thousand miles. Second thing is, at 2 inches of lift or even at factory height on the JL and JTs, I still highly recommend at least lower front control arms to get your caster back, to have that drivability so you're not fighting your Jeep to go down the road straight. For the Wrangler JL and the JT model, that's about 6.5 to 7 degrees. And from factory, they start at about 4.5 to 5. So anything above that 4.5 inch lift mark, I highly recommend all 8 control arms to get your wheels centered in the wheel wells, to get all your angles right, all your caster, all your driveline, everything dialed in. And of course, anything over about 3 inches of lift, you do need the front and rear track bars. I didn't mention that in the beginning of the video, but those track bars do have a rubber bushing as well. So you saw that I did crack the bushings loose and let them seat at their new ride height. And yeah, that about wraps it up. So if you have any questions still, please reach out to our sales team. We're happy to help. And if you like what we're doing, if you like the content we're providing, please comment, like, subscribe. That all helps us out in what we're doing. And we'll catch you in the next one.